Sometimes miracles don't arrive with trumpets or thunder. They arrive in the softest cries of a helpless soul. This was Bernie's miracle. A tiny kitten whose endless weeping would reveal a truth no one expected, and a bond strong enough to change hearts forever. Then flow into the scene of the kitten crying non-stop, pulling the viewer into the mystery. Imagine walking into a shelter where the air is thick, not with the soft mews of kittens or the hopeful barks of dogs waiting for families, but with a sound so haunting, so piercing, that it feels like claws raking against the inside of your chest. Brian stood frozen, his breath caught, as the screaming tore through the walls like a siren of despair. It wasn't meowing, it wasn't crying, it was screaming, raw, desperate, human-like in its agony. Every worker in the shelter had stopped, their faces etched in weariness and helplessness. Their bodies stiffened under the weight of a sound no heart should ever endure. "Sorry!" A frazzled worker rushed to him, raising her voice over the shrill wail. "It's a kitten, 8 days straight, non-stop. We're at our breaking point." The noise clawed at Brian's soul, like a plea from a creature too small to bear the weight of such sorrow. He asked, trembling, "What's wrong with him?" And the worker's grim reply cut deeper than any blade. "That's the problem. Nobody knows, and we're running out of options. The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel." The verse echoed in Brian's mind, binding him to this unseen cry for mercy. By the time the worker gestured toward the back of the shelter, his heart had already made its choice, though his eyes had not yet met the source of the scream. This was no ordinary animal rescue. This was survival. A viral YouTube story about a human and animal connection that could either break a heart or mend one. And Brian knew, before taking a single step forward, that this was the kind of moment that could touch the soul of millions. The corridor stretched like a tunnel of fate, lined with cages where tails wagged and eyes sparkled with hope, each animal praying in silence for a chance. Dogs thumped their tails against metal bars. Cats stretched lazily in the patchwork sun. But none of their noises pierced the air. The screaming grew louder, sharper, like a beacon guiding him into the storm. Each step Brian took seemed heavier than the last, as if the weight of a decision not yet made pressed down on his shoulders. When at last he saw the cage, small, cold, unyielding, the sight within nearly broke him. A tiny orange and white kitten, no more than a few months old, his mouth open in an endless wail, his fragile body trembling from the force of his own sorrow. And in those wide, watery eyes, Brian swore he saw the reflection of grief. Almost human, almost holy. "Since the day he arrived," Janet whispered, her voice trembling like a confession. "Abandoned on our doorstep, 3 vets have examined him. Healthy, they said, but he won't stop. Nothing comforts him. We've tried food, toys, blankets, companionship, even staying overnight to cradle him. Nothing works. People leave. Adoptions are falling. Complaints have reached the city. We're at our wits' end." Her eyes darted away, heavy with a truth too cruel to voice. The unspoken word, euthanasia, floated in the air like a shadow of death. Brian's chest tightened as he crouched to meet the kitten's gaze, tiny paws gripping cold iron like a prisoner begging for release. In that moment, he knew. This was not madness. This was a soul calling for salvation. "I'll take him," Brian said, his voice unshakable. The staff froze, eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you certain?" Janet whispered. "We can't take him back if—" "I understand," Brian interrupted. His hand pressed against the cage. Sometimes animals don't need fixing. They just need someone who won't give up. Are not 2 spires sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your father's care. The verse lit his heart like fire. He signed the papers with hands steady as stone, paid the fee, and carried out not just a kitten, but a mission. He would no longer be Screamer. "Your name is Bernie," Brian whispered, "and we will figure this out." It was not just an adoption. It was a covenant between man and beast, one that fate and faith had written long before. The car became a cage of echoes, the cries bouncing off windows and rattling Brian's bones until his head throbbed. Drivers turned to stare at red lights, puzzled faces searching for the source of anguish. Twice, Brian pulled over, gripping the wheel with white knuckles, his temples pounding. But every time he looked back at the trembling kitten, his resolve only deepened. At home, he prepared a sanctuary, a bed soft as clouds, food and water bowls filled with care, toys lined up like soldiers ready to fight the battle of loneliness. But Bernie wanted none of it. His tiny paws pattered across the apartment floor, his mouth open in endless cry, as though searching, always searching, for something the world had stolen. The night stretched into torment. Earplugs failed, closed doors failed, walls failed. By 3 a.m., Brian sat slumped on his couch, his eyes burning from tears and sleeplessness, as Bernie's cries echoed like a lament in a cathedral. "What is it, little one?" he whispered, voice cracking. "What are you trying to tell me?" He cradled the kitten against his chest, rocking gently, and for the briefest moment the cry softened. A heartbeat of silence before the storm returned. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Brian clung to the verse as if it were rope in a storm, for he was not only rescuing Bernie, he was fighting for both of them, for humanity's promise to care, for the fragile thread that binds man to beast in the great wilderness of survival. This was no ordinary story. This was a heartwarming animal video in the making. A viral YouTube story that could awaken compassion in even the coldest soul. The days blurred into a cycle of trial and failure. Hand feeding, heating pads, soothing words, pheromone diffusers, classical music playing in the dim hours of the night. None of it worked. Bernie screamed. And yet, each scream only pulled Brian closer, weaving a bond forged in struggle. The neighbors began to complain, kindness laced with fatigue. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked softly, apologizing that the cries were keeping her baby awake. Brian bowed his head, apologizing, promising solutions, though his own chest ached with doubt. But surrender was not in his heart. By the 7th day, Brian looked at Bernie, pacing, crying, pleading, and whispered, "There has to be a reason. Animals don't do this without a reason." His hands trembled as he booked an appointment with Dr. Sarah Martinez, the city's finest feline healer. The waiting room fell silent as Bernie's cries filled it, strangers staring as if the small kitten carried a grief too great for his size. Brian held him close, whispering, "We're going to find it, I promise." And in that moment, something shifted. This was no longer a battle of noise or patience. It was survival. A dramatic wildlife rescue hidden not in the wild, but within the walls of human hearts. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. The verse sealed the promise. Mercy would prevail. And so, the story that began with unbearable screams carried within it the seed of miracle. Brian never imagined that the sound that once pierced his soul would one day be replaced with silence. Not the silence of loss, but the silence of peace. For within weeks, with love, medical answers, and relentless faith, Bernie's cries softened, transformed into purrs that vibrated against Brian's chest like a hymn. The neighbors who once complained now smiled at the window when they saw the man and his kitten basking in sunlight. The shelter workers who once feared the worst heard the news and wept with relief. What had begun as a scream had become a song of survival, a testament to the unbreakable bond between human and animal. And in the quiet nights, when Bernie curled against him, Brian would whisper, "We made it, little one. We made it. For every creature of God is good, and nothing to be refused, if it be received with thanksgiving." The story that had once threatened to end in sorrow became a heartwarming animal video the world would never forget. A viral YouTube story of hope, survival, and love. A man who would not give up, a kitten who would not stop crying, and a miracle that would forever echo in the hearts of all who heard it. The walls of the veterinary clinic quivered with the sound. That same endless scream that had haunted Brian's nights. The cry of a kitten too small to hold such sorrow. Other pet owners clutched their animals closer, their brows furrowed in concern and unease. Even the receptionist, accustomed to the chaos of emergencies, looked shaken. And when Dr. Sarah Martinez herself entered the room, her calm and practiced demeanor wavered under the assault of Bernie's voice. I've never heard anything quite like that, she admitted softly, leading them into an examination room. The light flickered across sterile walls, the sound magnified by the hollow echo of tile floors. As Bernie wailed, Brian poured out everything he knew. The abandonment, the endless week of sleepless nights, the shelter's despair. Dr. Martinez listened with the patience of one who had seen many broken animals, but her eyes betrayed a shadow of worry. Her hands were steady as she examined Bernie. Ears, throat, lungs, reflexes, even his tear ducts, as if searching for the invisible wound buried deep within. She paused, puzzled, her brow furrowing. Physically, he appears healthy. No infection, no injury. But this behavior, it is not normal. Her words hit Brian like a wave of cold water. Healthy, yet screaming. A paradox that clawed at his soul. I want to run specialized tests. Tear ducts, internal scans, blood work, she continued. Sometimes pain hides where eyes cannot see. We'll know in 2 days. 2 days. 2 nights of screaming. 2 eternities of sorrow. Brian nodded, clutching Bernie close as though holding him together by sheer force of will. As they left, the verse whispered through his mind like a candle against the dark. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. He clung to it like breath itself, for this was more than a medical puzzle. This was an animal, miracle waiting to be uncovered. A survival story that could break hearts and mend them all at once. A viral YouTube story bound to remind the world of the sacred thread between animal and humanity. That night, the cries filled the apartment like floodwaters seeping into every corner, drowning out thought, rest, and reason. Brian sat in darkness, face buried in his hands, while Bernie's small form paced, restless, his mouth open to the heavens. It was not just noise. It was grief given voice. And as the hours bled into dawn, an idea sparked like lightning in Brian's chest. What if the answer was not in the present, but in the past? What if this ceaseless lament was rooted in something left behind? By morning, weary but resolute, he returned to the shelter, where Janet met him with tired eyes. He was found on our doorstep, she explained, pulling a worn file from her desk. Carrier blanket, no note, no explanation. We never knew who left him or why. Brian's heart clenched. Abandonment, silence where answers should be. Is there any security footage? He asked, hope flickering. Janet shook her head. Only the interior. Only the cages and corridors. Not the door where fate had laid down a trembling life. But then, a spark. The electronics shop across the street, she said suddenly. Mr. Kim, he might have exterior cameras. And so Brian crossed, carrying not just Bernie's cries, but the weight of every unanswered question. Inside Kim's electronics, amidst shelves of wires and glowing screens, he found a man with kind eyes, willing ears. That poor kitten, Mr. Kim murmured. Of course I'll help. In the dim back office, the footage came to life. The grainy street bathed in early morning gray. Hours slipped past until, at 5:47 a.m., there it was. A sleek luxury sedan, headlights off, rolling silent as guilt. A figure emerged, shadowed and nervous, placing a small carrier at the shelter's door before fleeing back into the car. Brian's heart hammered. Can you zoom on the plate? He asked, voice taut. The screen sharpened, not enough to give all, but enough to give something. Letters, numbers, a clue. He wrote them down, clutching the slip of paper as though it were salvation itself. That night, Bernie still cried, but Brian's heart beat differently. For now, there was direction, there was pursuit. For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. The truth had left its trail, and Brian would follow. This was no longer just an emotional true story of survival. This was the unraveling of a dramatic wildlife rescue hidden in the folds of human deceit. The kind of heart-touching story that could stir millions when told. Hill Rest. The very name carried weight. A place of gilded gates and sprawling mansions, where wealth hid its secrets behind iron and stone. And it was there Brian's search led him. Bernie's cries trembling from within his carrier like a compass, pointing true north. Michael Chen. A name etched into business records. A man whose success had built castles in the clouds. Yet behind the grandeur, Brian sensed shadows. As he drove up the tree-lined boulevard, his modest car looked out of place, swallowed by the vastness of marble columns and manicured lawns. The iron gate loomed, an intercom embedded like a sentinel. He pressed the button, and Bernie's wail pierced the speaker like an arrow. "Yes?" came the voice, refined, accented, cautious. Brian steadied himself. "This concerns a kitten abandoned at a shelter. I believe someone here knows why." Silence. Then, reluctantly, the gate buzzed open. The driveway coiled like a serpent to the mansion's steps, where a butler stood waiting, his face pale, his stance trembling with secrets. "Sir," he said, his voice wavering, "perhaps we should discuss privately before—" But the cries carried through the open door, echoing across marble and chandeliers. Footsteps thundered, and then a man appeared. Silver hair, sharp suit, eyes that widened in shock as if time itself had been rewound. "Bernie!" Michael Chen gasped, rushing forward, his face alight with joy and disbelief. "Oh my God! Bernie! Is it really you?" Bernie's cry shifted, still urgent but threaded with something else. Recognition. A sound less like despair and more like longing answered. Brian stood frozen as truth rippled through the air. The butler, Charlie, staggered back, his face pale with guilt. "Sir," he stammered, wringing his hands. "I can explain." Michael turned, eyes blazing with betrayal. "You told me he escaped." Charlie sank into a leather chair, his composure shattering. "He wouldn't stop crying, sir," he whispered. "Day and night. Nothing worked. I thought the shelter could help him. I thought they'd know what to do. I was losing sleep, losing hope. I couldn't bear to see you suffer too." His voice cracked under the weight of regret. "Forgive me." Michael's hands shook as he touched the carrier, eyes locked on his beloved kitten. Brian watched, his chest swelling with both fury and awe. This was no simple abandonment. This was love betrayed by desperation, a heartwarming animal story twisted by human weakness. Yet in that room, under chandeliers and shadows, something holy stirred. Bernie had been crying not out of madness, but out of memory, calling for the master he had lost, the home torn from him in the name of misguided mercy. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. And in that truth lay the miracle. The cries that had broken hearts were the cries of love that refused to die. "Because I couldn't bear to see you suffer anymore," Charlie admitted, his voice trembling with guilt. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he confessed. "I thought the shelter would discover what was wrong and maybe find him a family who could handle his needs better than we were. I never imagined it would take so long. I never meant for Bernie to suffer." The vet finally spoke with calm certainty. "Bernie has a bacterial infection in his tear duct. That's all. Painful, yes, but completely treatable with simple antibiotics." And just like that, within hours of the first dose, the cries that had filled the nights for 8 long days fell silent. For the first time, Bernie curled up in peace, purring, not weeping. Michael, though devastated by Charlie's deception and forced to let him go, was overcome with joy at Bernie's miraculous recovery. Brian, the one who refused to give up, left with quiet satisfaction, knowing he had been the voice for a tiny life that others overlooked. Sometimes, persistence uncovers what the world misses. Sometimes, One cry is worth listening to, because behind it is a miracle waiting to be found. What about you? Would you have adopted a kitten who cried endlessly, not knowing if it would ever stop? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your heart. If this story touched you, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Every click helps stories like Bernie's reach the world. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the smallest cry carries the biggest miracle. And so, what began as 8 days of relentless cries ended in silence. Not the silence of despair, but the silence of healing. Bernie's tiny body, once trembling with pain, finally rested in peace, his purrs rising like a hymn of gratitude. What seemed like a curse became a miracle in disguise. A reminder that sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest truth. Michael's heart broke at Charlie's betrayal, but it mended when he saw Bernie's eyes finally free of tears. Brian left not with pride, but with quiet joy, knowing that persistence had saved a life. And Bernie, he was no longer the crying kitten. He was a living miracle, proof that love and patience can uncover what others overlook. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. So ask yourself, would you have listened to Bernie's cries? Would you have held on, even when the world told you to give up? Sometimes the miracle isn't in the answer we're seeking. It's in the persistence of the heart that refuses to stop believing. If Bernie's miracle touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Because every view, every click, every heart that listens keeps the miracles alive.